So your work can only be described as bringing the tree and the human together and looking at that relationship. There's these beautiful printmaking imbued aspects, but also a lyrical poem that you developed that I can only describe as tree poems. My first question to you is how the text component of your work came together and what you think that does to the reading of the work.
Well, I've always been like interested in text. Like writing comes quite naturally to me, and like almost more naturally than like kind of visual expression of my thoughts. And so, and I have like I enjoy the aesthetic aspects of text as well. And so like it was important to me in these two works, like. Both of these works are about bringing a specific tree or like evoking a specific tree in the gallery space, which I wanted to then contextualize. So it's not just that you kind of feel the tree and have like a kind of like tactile aesthetic experience of the tree, but also that it's like evoked in its like broader context.
Yeah.
So both works speak to the same tree and kind of provide three different perspectives, relationships with the tree. So I spent a lot of time during my MFA kind of developing these texts and trying to...
And the bleeding heart trees, which are these rainforest trees,
Yep.
and they kind of grow everywhere through urban sprawl and things like that. What kind of drew you to the bleeding heart tree as a choice of, tree medium?
Well, it's actually, it came to me because one self-seeded in my backyard probably 5 or so years ago. But I really love the bleeding heart tree. I mean, it's called a bleeding heart because it has leaves that turn red before they fall off, and it's not deciduous, so they all just turn red and fall off individually throughout the year. They're sort of heart-shaped, so that's why it's called a bleeding heart. But I also think it's a very evocative name, and I like the way it speaks to the kind of denigration of like caring for nature that you often like hear from like right-wing media, that, you know, all these like bleeding heart lefties that care about trees. But then also it's called a pioneer species. So it's very, one of the first trees that comes up in areas of disturbance in the rainforest and allows the new kind of generation of rainforest trees to grow up. And I liked that as a kind of metaphor for what I was trying to do in my MFA, that there's a sense of regeneration of the relationship between the human and the tree, or the human and the natural world.
And I remember talking to you as you were kind of in that haptic stage of trying to finish the last bit of your MFA and writing your thesis, and you were telling me no more detours, but I imagine it's gone through various aspects of botany and plant history and things such as that. So were there any really interesting facts about bleeding heart trees that you came across that you either put into your text or tried to show visually?
Like, I find it so fascinating that, and this was something that I like learned when I was doing all this reading, that like trees and plants, they don't have the same kind of, I think it's called like morphological flexibility. So in humans, stem cells are the only parts of our only cells that can become any other kind of cell. But in plants and trees, all of their cells can become other kinds of cell. So that's why you can take like a cutting of a plant and stick it in the ground and it'll grow roots and become a new plant. And there's this kind of like ontological generosity involved in this, and bountifulness involved in plants in general, and then also in the kind of the role that the bleeding heart plays in the environment, that I really like, and that I think like as humans we could do a lot to learn from.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and casting also comes into play. You've cast bits of trees and done imprints, and is casting as a choice something that perhaps is like such a direct relationship with the tree that you're pressing into it? There's like this very like connected quality to it. Is that one of the factors that you try to do with casting?
Yeah, so like I started casting the tree because I was interested. So the other thing that I find like fascinating about trees is the way they completely like adhered to their environment, and so everything about their physical expression is like a mirror of their environment, and they truly embody their own history, in that the history of the tree, like everything, or its whole life story is expressed through its form. So I really wanted to capture that in the work in some way, and that's why I was kind of thinking about casting, because it takes this like direct impression of the form of the tree and its history, and preserves it and brings it into the gallery space. It was also a kind of ethical choice, because I didn't want to, have to like cut down this tree to like bring it into a gallery space. And like I have kind of ethical issues with when people bring plants into gallery spaces and then cart them off again. And so a lot of the work was about trying to evoke the tree in its absence. And I think there's an interesting relationship between casting and like presence and absence, that in the cast you kind of make it present, but you also remove it from, there's also like a level of remove, so it's cast in plaster. The form is slightly distorted because obviously it's like not flat, it's round. So there's an interesting kind of relationship between the presence and absence, and that also I think exists in print, so it speaks to my other work in print as well.
And you've told me as we were moving towards this that you had plans to do other trees. What other trees did you have in mind, and is there any interesting stories that you're going off with those future works?
Well, I'm really obsessed with fig trees. I find them like really fascinating, and like I find their physical forms really fascinating, and the huge variety of fig trees that there are, and the way they all are slightly different, but there is a sort of similarity between them. And I love Hyde Park. I find Hyde Park like a very like spiritual place actually, and find it very like calming. If I'm in the city and I'm like a bit overwhelmed, I like to go to Hyde Park and just like sit like under those fig trees. So I'm really interested in like kind of taking this approach and thinking about it, because this is obviously these works are very kind of local and like hyper local even, and domestic. And so I'm interested in taking this approach and kind of bringing it into a broader, more public sphere of looking at Hyde Park and the history of Hyde Park, all of this, the way it kind of becomes a social, cultural, like whatever, like nexus of all these layered histories, and then how the tree kind of express that. But then you start getting into like having to deal with the council and stuff. So I haven't started that yet. So I'm really interested in fig trees, and they have just like amazing bark. I'm like obsessed with the texture of the bark of the fig trees. I really want to see it like cast.
Thank you, Brigida.
Thank you.